Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us for this conversation about avoiding the pitfalls of the Common Core. Many of you are already deep into the Common Core, some just starting, some perhaps taking a wait-and-see attitude, and we'll try to address what we've learned around the United States about what we think is best practice and maybe some avoiding mistakes that other people have made. Let's begin, as we always do, with just a quick research update. I'm indebted to a Iowa district for sending me these data because the reason I title this slide, does 90-90-90 still work? Many of you recognize the 90-90-90 studies, 90% poverty, 90% minority, 90% meeting or exceeding standards. And look, I'm fully aware that, number one, those were done a number of years ago, and number two, a lot of people might say, well, gee, that was then. What's happening in 2012? And here's a really good example of how principals, teachers, and senior administrators have taken those ideas and really put them into action. Without belaboring the point, you'll remember that the 90-90-90 practices had to do with deep implementation of great curriculum, regular assessments, most importantly, multiple opportunities for student success. And by that we mean that the consequence for failure, like not turning work in or doing work badly, isn't failure, it's actually getting the work done. So in this particular system, and by the way, if you want to read more about the details on this, it was published in the July 2012 American School Board Journal. Then they said, look, if you don't get your work done between Monday and Thursday, that's between you and the teacher. But if you don't have it done by Friday, you're going to go to the catch-up room. Whether you spell it with a C or a K is a regional peculiarity, but you're going to catch up, as in catch up, on your homework. The results speak for themselves. The comparison between last year when they didn't have this and this most recent school year when they did, look at that, 385 failures to 15 failures. What would your school be like if you could have 370 fewer failures in the previous year? Now I want you to note, these were the same teachers, same administrators, same students. They didn't get rid of the bad teachers. They didn't bring in the new ones all waiting at the door. They didn't ship out the bad students and bring in the good ones. Same people, just different practices. And when failure goes down, look what happened to suspensions. From 338 to 147, about a 60% decrease. And as you'll see in other research that we've written, that is very consistent. Dramatic reductions in suspensions when Fs go down. And what about attendance? Better attendance. So I'm not saying that there's one cause for one effect. I'm just noticing when everything else was the same teachers, same students, same administrators, but a critical change in teaching practice that is a different consequence for missing and bad work, great things happen. So let's get into the meat of today. We know, I'm really indebted to Teresa Amabile, Amabile, I need to keep saying her name right, and her husband, Professor Kramer at Harvard Business School, who did a remarkable piece of work with this new book, The Progress Principle. For every administrator, every teacher, leader, this is a thoughtful piece of work, because what she talked about is the difference between our external life, things like annual reviews and so on, and our inner life of work. And she found that what really sustains us is doing meaningful work, having autonomy within appropriate boundaries, getting feedback on how we're doing, being competent and having the right to innovate. Now, to the administrators listening on here, I want to ask you as we start this new school year, please don't think you're going to motivate the faculty by saying, I want you to do this for a 4% gain in test scores. I want you to instead talk about meaning. What would we do if there were no mandates? What would we do if there were no financial incentives or penalties? What's just the right thing to do? The evidence from Professors Amabile and Kramer say that we are more likely to motivate people with meaning and with reasonable autonomy within boundaries. And I'll apply that to the Common Core in just a moment. And finally, let's take a look at a poll question here. I want you to take a look, and if you'd be willing to use your poll function, I'm going to just be patient with me a minute. Describe your level of readiness for the Common Core. And just take about 30 or 40 seconds to let me know where your system is right now. Then I'll share with you the results. Take about 10 more seconds, please. And let's take a look at what you had to say. And I need to share the results. Here we go. And that will show you where we are. Remarkable, isn't it, that only 3% are not working. The vast majority of you are about 65% either central office or teachers studying but not yet implementing. About a quarter of you fully implementing, 7% already implemented. That's remarkably consistent with what we're seeing, and there's a very large number of you participating today. And so while I'm not claiming that this is a nationally representative sample, I will tell you that what you're seeing here is very, very consistent. And what that suggests to me is that we've got a significant number of you that are studying, not yet implementing, and I hope today I can make a case that we need to start implementing. And the reason I want to do that is that we, at our peril, wait too long to be implemented. The second thing I want to do is to honor the veterans who are participating here, because a lot of you were around 15 years ago, maybe even 20 years for some of you, from what I've called Standards 1.0. And so let's take a look at this one, and be patient with me as I hit the poll. You'll just have to. Here we go. Let me get to the next one. What were your lessons? And here we go. And you can answer as many of these as you want. You can answer more than one if you prefer. Take about 30 seconds again. And about 10 more seconds, please. And let's take a look at what you say your views are. Interestingly, your results here, we needed more time, are exactly consistent with what we're hearing from some of the national surveys of teachers about their greatest source of discontent. It is not, as the media would have you believe, just money and bargaining rights. It is time. Needed more time to develop curriculum, needed more time to cover the standards. I'm so interested that almost half of you said there are still important but non-tested skills. I was just with a group that was talking about 21st century skills of communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity. And as much as I respect the designers and the creators of assessments on the Common Core, I want to say as candidly as I can, no standardized assessments are going to get to those essential collaborative and communication skills. That's something that you and I need to do. Don't settle for the Common Core. It's a baseline, not more. So what we need to do now is to say, what can we learn from this, and how can we proceed in a constructive and thoughtful way? That's how I'm going to spend the rest of my time today. We're going to talk about the mistakes that you see before you. Waiting for 2014, depending upon external tests. I think a lot of people are there. I'll wait and see, Doug, what those tests are going to look like. The disempowerment of teachers as if simply delivery is sufficient, settling for mere proficiency when I know many of your students can do more than that, and delivery of documents without meaningful implementation. So let's briefly explore each one of those 5 pitfalls. First, I hear people say, well, wait and see what happens in 2014. Friends, I can't encourage you strongly enough not to fall into that particular mistake. The reason is this. If you examine the Common Core expectations, particularly with respect to nonfiction writing, particularly with respect to middle and high school math, you will see a significant gap of more than 1 year between where a lot of students are now and what the Common Core requires. If you wait until the test is coming out, you're not going to have time to close that gap unless you intend to have an 18-hour school day. So we need to start now identifying where those gaps are. That means this year, if we're not doing informative writing to a significant extent in elementary, starting in kindergarten, don't wait for 14. Let's do it now. Same with regard to some of the closing the gap in math skills and elsewhere. In many cases, teachers are telling me that the time allocation in their curriculum schedules simply isn't enough. It's not enough for students. It's not enough for teachers. You can't wait until 2014. Pitfall number 2, depending upon external tests. Look, I want to fully acknowledge, I understand your sense of skepticism here. Some of you are saying, well, look, last time in the 1990s, we went all the way down the path of our state standards, and then the state test came out, and they were testing kids on different things than we thought. Look, that is the nature of new tests. I assume completely good faith by the participants on the Smarter Balance and the PARC consortia. I think they're doing their level best. But every new test has a level of unfamiliarity with it. And as sophisticated and well-intentioned as those standardized tests may be, there are going to be some critical skills that won't be assessed. That means if you really think that collaboration, for example, is important, please don't wait for a standardized test to do that. Let's think of ways that students work alone and together to have what Ellen Langer thoughtfully calls mindful collaboration right now. Let's think about how we can generate creativity, not just in music and art, but creativity in response to different hypotheses in a science class, creativity with regard to different ways to solve a mathematical challenge, creativity with regard to different ways to examine historical documents in a social studies class. We can do that, and when teachers are challenged to do that by not waiting for others, that is empowering. I know, let me explain the issue on psychometric demands. Every time you have a high-stakes test, and these will undeniably be that, then they have to have a high level of reliability. Without going into excruciating detail, reliability is measured by how much do similar students get right similar questions. Sometimes that leads to a range of different difficulty, but sometimes what people think is different ranges of difficulty is actually a different range of unfamiliarity. And because I think we can anticipate that happen, Robert Lynn, perhaps one of our foremost psychometricians in the United States, says the surest way to predict a decline in scores is to have a new test. We need to anticipate that now. And the way to constructively do that, so it doesn't sound like an excuse, is to think of other ways that you and your district will analyze and assess student achievement. So you can present a complete and comprehensive picture of who they are, what they're learning, and what their gains are, and everything that's important. Please do not replicate the mistakes of the last 10 years and simply say all we are is a couple of test scores. Pitfall number 3, disempowering teachers. Grant Wiggins wrote a famous article that I still think resonates today, even though it's now perhaps 20 years old. It was in Ed Leadership called Standards, Not Standardization. That must be our byword today as well. I think there's a lot to commend the Common Core. If you've read my other writings on that, you know that I've tried to be pretty even-handed, saying where I think they're successful, identifying some areas where they can be improved. But however good a set of standards may be, it can't lead to standardization. The same standard, for example, must be explained in different ways, made relevant in different ways based upon the creativity and ways that teachers add value to curriculum and classroom assessment in every part of the country. That's why one of the first things we ask you to do is not just parrot what the standards are, but rather say, what's an engaging and relevant scenario in your community, which will be different in rural Alaska than it is in downtown Boston, different in the central United States than perhaps other places. That doesn't mean the standards are different, but it means the way that we make scenarios engaging and relevant are different. And so that I'm not being obtuse here, I think there's a great opportunity in the southeast United States to use the BP oil spill to study science, to study mathematical modeling, to study community awareness and representative democracy and social studies, as well as our legal system. Just as 20 years earlier, I saw teachers in Alaska using the Exxon Valdez experience to make it relevant and to teach science and social studies and so on. I don't know what the analogous situation is in your community, but think of what would really grab students and community attention. Also, teachers can really be empowered by saying, what evidence do students have to provide beyond the standards? Some students will struggle to meet the Common Core. Others will walk in the door meeting them. We must be prepared for both. And as good a job as the standards writers did for giving examples of proficiency, there's a void in helping students explain, what do I need to do beyond that? We dare not let them go back to autopilot thinking, well, I'm proficient, so now I'm done. We want to constantly challenge them. Read Daniel Pink's wonderful book, Drive. I know many of you already have. That makes the leap from extrinsic motivation, a test score, to the intrinsic motivation, brought about by a great challenge that teachers can create beyond the standards. Let's think about classroom assessments as well. It's really the day-to-day interaction, the powerful feedback that teachers give to students that's most important. And administrators, I want to ask you as seriously as I can, don't pile a bunch of standards on teachers without giving them the time to do it. There are already systems that are going to have double blocks for writing, double blocks for math, in middle school and high school particularly, because the gap between what the Common Core requires and what they are asking for is simply too large to fill. Now, I want to stop and listen to you for a moment. I've been talking enough, and request that you use your question function to tell me what are strategies that you've seen that are most empowering and motivating for teachers. I'll give you about 60 seconds, and then I'll come back on the line. Some really thoughtful ideas that just came in, and I'll mention a few of them, and of course I'll be happy to share with them. I know that we, a lot of people said, I find it empowering to have time to collaborate with grade level teachers. And after we meet and implement coming back together to review and adjust, when our principal has time to attend. Several of you said allowing individuals input on what they need for professional development and physically mapping where everyone is. All of these ideas strike me as exceptionally thoughtful, and what I want to give you some encouragement about is that when teachers become part of the PD planning and execution, not merely part of the recipient of what's being delivered, you can have a much more empowering system. The other thing that is a common theme to all of you who just sent notes in is that you need not have just a delivery system alone. What you're able to have is people who can help plan and execute and deliver what they're doing. Pitfall number 4, settling for proficiency. One of the things that we want to create is the Hattie objective. And if you're familiar with John Hattie's works, particularly you should read Visible Learning for Teachers. You know that the number one thing that we can do is have challenging, specific, individual learning goals. And that means that the students know not only what the goal is, but where they are right now and what the next step is, with feedback all along the way. We also need an engagement strategy for the adults in the room, and that is to say, what would we do just because it's the right thing to do? And finally, number 5, delivery without implementation, the worst pitfall of all. That was the number one lesson of Standards 1.0. Just delivering things, the standard of the day, a lot of stuff written on boards, without necessarily any conviction of whether or not it was implemented in a meaningful way with feedback, with engaging scenarios, and classroom activities. Be particularly alert to what I would call paperwork illusions, and that is the illusion that we are implementing standards simply by having paperwork displayed in the hallway or in a war room, as some of them unfortunately called them, rather than what Hattie calls deliberate practice. And that means that we not only identify a standard, but where students are and what their next step is to making improvements. So I want to, before I go to questions, offer a couple of ideas of what you can do right now. If you want to lower the blood pressure of your staff, do this. Highlight the parts of the Common Core that you're already doing. I fear that one reason that people are waiting too long for implementation is that they aren't giving themselves credit for what they're already doing. Literally go through with a highlighter, and you'll identify, we're doing this, we're doing this. You'll see some things that you're not doing, but give yourself credit first for what you are. Secondly, identify the gaps. As I suggested, some of those gaps have to do particularly with informative writing, and that starts literally in kindergarten. I've noticed significant gaps in middle school as well. Expand informative writing, and my request to you here is not to make English language arts be the only place you do that. Some of the best studies that we've documented of system-level success include informative writing in every single subject, every single grade level, every single month. We need to make Common Core a school-wide initiative, not something that depends solely upon English language arts and math. And give your colleagues the time They need more time, particularly in middle school, to close the gap between where we are now and where we're going. Now, I promised that I was going to give you questions. You've been opportunity for questions. You've been so patient with me. So let's see if we can take a few of these, and and I also am interested in what your advice is for future webinars. So let's take a few questions and be patient with me as I get to the bottom. First, are the slides available for me to download or look at afterwards? Yes, we'll absolutely do that. You can download them, and we make them available in a format that whatever you have, Mac or PC, you can download them. Just go to www.leadandlearn.com. In addition to the slides, we also make available the actual audio and video of these and other webinars. Can we please see the slide for settling for proficiency again? Yes, I'll be happy to do that. Be patient with me, and yes, there it is, and I'll leave that up there for you for a moment while I take some additional questions. It's helpful, you said, for us to now, how do you best implement informative writing at the elementary level? I think, first of all, we have to define what we really mean. I have observed over the years a significant bias toward story writing, toward personal narrative, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just insufficient. We have to do other things as well, and that means describing things. Now, that might be describing a character in a story, describing a pet, describing a butterfly, but descriptive writing is different from simply personal narratives. I think I know second graders who revel in persuasive writing, taking different points of view, and certainly a comparative writing, what things are similar, what things are different. You asked, where do you find on your website the slides? I think it's at the Multimedia Resource Center. Click on that and you'll see a great big menu of things that we have to offer. What was the title of Daniel Pink's book? That's pink like the color, P-I-N-K, and the title is Drive, D-R-I-V-E. What will the writing assessment look like at the lower elementary level? The best answer to your question, because I don't know if you're a Park State or a Common Core state, is both of the assessment consortia have websites that I think have been pretty good about putting examples of what assessment items look like. Now, the honest answer is we're not going to know until they come out, but I think the consortia have been dramatically better than assessment organizations have been in the past about opening up insight into the sort of writing that they have. Now, that said, let me offer a consumer warning here. Any summative assessment is just that. And we all know that writing gets better through editing and rewriting. And so even if the summative assessment has prompt response, that doesn't take away from the fact that best classroom practice involves writing, getting feedback, editing, and revising 3, 4, 5 times. That's still best practice, even if you have an online summative assignment. If I needed additional training on teacher capacity for writing K-12, who would you recommend? I'll tell you I mean, there are many sources, but an author to read is Angela Peary. That's P-E-E-R-Y. Several books on that with specific emphasis on Common Core. What are your recommendations for working directly with teacher leader groups to begin this important work? Well, shoot, I'm prejudiced because I think those institutes that I suggested particularly address teacher leaders. The way you get this implemented isn't by somebody giving a speech about the Common Core in a dark auditorium. It's by taking the very best teacher leaders you've got and letting them have the opportunity to be certified in this content and then deliver it classroom to classroom, building to building. Evidence that I think is pretty persuasive says that we need to have models by teachers that other teachers can replicate, and that is exactly at our certification programs at the Leadership and Learning Center what we try to help you do. You said, are there already resources of the states mapping and unpacking? There are some examples. I've seen some good examples in New York and Delaware, and I know that other states probably too. I mean no offense by omitting people, but there are some states. However, don't let somebody else's document be a substitute for your teacher's knowledge. There's a real, the book to read on this is Larry Ainsworth, A-I-N-S-W-O-R-T-H, Ainsworth. The title is Rigorous Curriculum Design. And Ainsworth in the book Rigorous Curriculum Design makes a huge point out of saying what we need to do is to give people the opportunity to see what unpacking and unwrapping really looks like. And that is not something that happens by just having a document delivered to you. It really is going through the standards and asking this essential question: what's the evidence that my students have to provide that they're actually proficient in this particular standard? You said my students are new to the country with limited English and literacy backgrounds. That's true for many of us, and I've had to deal with the same thing. So that's a great example of why you don't try to plow them through every standard. You identify what's most important. For example, supplementing what I said earlier about the issue of the primacy of nonfiction writing, I found the use of interactive journals with second language students especially effective. You write a question to them, they write back to you. However fragmentary the English and inventive the spelling may be, that daily experience of interactive writing, and they also get to take the time to read your responsive sentences slowly at their pace and carefully. It's also, frankly, a great teacher morale issue, because over the course of the year, you'll see those interactive journals expand from 1 or 2 sentences to just an extraordinary dialogue that will really serve you well. Any ideas for resources to share with teachers who want to know what the Common Core instructional shift looks like in classrooms? The best that I can offer to you, there are certainly, if you just want to know what the standards are, you can, there's plenty of free apps that you can download. But your question is about instructional shift, and that's why I think those institutes that you can see at leadandlearn.com are worthwhile looking at. We focus not on what the standards say alone. That's pretty superficial. It's what does it mean in the classroom in terms of evidence from students and teachers. Oh, here's a great idea. You said one exercise I did with my staff was a green, yellow, red light gap analysis. The staff coded standards in a green that they felt that they were already doing. They coded things in yellow that they thought they could do, and red was something reserved for things that we had to work on. They loved the activity, and it relieved a lot of stress. Thank you for sharing such a thoughtful idea. Let's see. I know because we have hundreds of people on the line, I'm missing stuff, and all I can ask for is your patience. How are districts going to overcome budget constraints as they attempt to add more informational reading? First of all, let's just acknowledge that budget constraints are real, and anybody who thinks that they aren't hasn't observed higher class sizes, layoffs, and stress that's going on now. That said, honestly, writing is one of those things that doesn't require buying things. In fact, a lot of the things that we recommend at these institutes, collaborative scoring, writing, common analysis of student work, that's not a program to buy. That is a practice. I think, frankly, some of the best things in instruction aren't things that you go out and buy, but they are practices that you can replicate and that you can own. And I would put nonfiction writing as part of that. I do think that there are, little simple and inexpensive things. We've done like little $9.95 prompts in social studies and music and PE and art to help. But it's not like you've got to go out and buy some $100,000 program. It's really a change in practice. You said at the middle and high school level, where do you take time away to give more to ELA and math? Students still need to take science and foreign language, social studies. You're right, but you ask a straight question, you deserve a straight answer. Number one, that intervention for time doesn't start in high school. It starts in 7th and 8th grade. It is more important to double up content, especially to get literacy competency and math competency in 7th and 8th grade, than to have the typically fragmented middle school curriculum. Moreover, if I don't do that, and I have students in 9th grade that are reading on a 6th grade grade level, what good does it have them to do to have a science and social studies textbook they cannot read? Far better to take what is now typically a sequence that is 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, then they take electives in 12th, change that to more literacy in math in 9th grade, and change that to a 10, 11, 12 social studies and science curriculum. Because I'll tell you, once students fall behind in 9th grade, the dropout data show very significantly that they are unlikely to catch up. And a literacy problem doesn't just mean an English language arts failure. That means a math failure, a science failure, a social studies failure. You want to do everything you can, including shifting some of those from a 9th to a 10th grade class, to give yourself the time you need for intervention. And don't believe in any silver bullets here. Ask anybody who's taught students algebra when the students can't add, subtract, multiply, and divide. They can do it. They're gifted teachers, but they can't do it in 55 minutes a day. We need more time. Here's a thoughtful question. You said we need some ways to calm teachers down when they see, for example, that fifth grade teachers who encounter common students can barely grasp basic and addition and fractions with unlike denominators, and they'll be expected to teach multiplication and division. You are right. That is why we've got to, let me suggest several things. Number one, we've got to stop the notion that the place you learn math is only in math class. Precisely on the issue that you raised, of fractions, for example, don't do measurement in science without taking the opportunity to express that measurement in different ways. So we get the idea of tenths, 100ths, 1,000ths. Don't do graphs in social studies without using the opportunity to reinforce what we're learning in math of different ways to express relationships among numbers. In other words, math can't be the only place that we learn that, and that's true not just in fifth grade, but throughout schooling. Secondly, not every allocation of time has to be the same. You know, I'm okay if some of you want to compartmentalize or departmentalize, but don't do so under the illusion that every subject is the same. English, language arts, and math do take more time, particularly if I have students, as you describe, who are struggling. You say the business community plays an important role in preparing our students for college and career. We'll all benefit from including our local business community in the discussions of how best to prepare students for effective communication in the workplace. You know, you're exactly right on that, but could I add a respectful footnote to that? Businesses can't, on the one hand, say we demand communication and creativity and critical thinking, and then on the other hand say, but we're going to judge your school only on the basis of a standardized test score that does not include communication, creativity, and critical thinking. So by all means, embrace the business community as you wisely suggest, but make them be intellectually consistent. And that means looking at the entire student product, not a couple of test scores. What would you recommend for the infusion of technology? I want to respect that technology is part of what we're dealing with, but friends, it's a tool. It is nothing but a tool. It is the number 2 pencil or the ballpoint pen of the 21st century. And when the number 2 pencil and the ballpoint pen were new technology, nobody assessed the quality of schools based upon having a 1 ballpoint pen per child initiative. They assessed that based upon what the teachers and students do. So I've seen too many examples of technology being present without being used, being the recipient of millions of dollars of investment without similar investments made in the teacher's time and ability to use them. So my biggest recommendation to you is the whiteboards and iPads are fine if and only if the teachers and the students have times and plans to use them and the time to demonstrate to each other. What's the structure for extra periods after school? Thanks for letting me address that. If we learned anything in the last 10 years about after-school programs, it's that the kids who most need after-school programs are least likely to participate in that. So what I'm telling you is whether it's intervention for missing homework or whether it's extra literacy in math, you do it during the school day. Where can I receive introductory training in order to receive certified training? At any of these institutes, and if you just email us or go to leadandlearn.com, you'll see more about those. And by the way, I know a lot of you are on travel lockdown. My colleagues and I will come to you. You don't have to come to Boston or Denver. I'm very respectful of the fact that travel is really difficult these days. We'll come to you if that's necessary. How do you handle writing in your content area when you teach large numbers of students, such as 240 in a quarter? You're really quite right about that, but I just want to tell you, and the book to read on this is Kristen Anderson's, that's Kristen with a K, Anderson, S-O-N, and the name of the title is Data Team Success Stories, and she specifically has case studies of teachers who handled precisely what you're describing. Even in large classes like PE, huge classes like music, everybody writes once a quarter. And the way you get that is that you don't try to make Doug, the math teacher, do 6 trait writing, or a band teacher, or an art teacher. What you can do is have 2 traits. Just focus, say, on content and maybe organization, or content and conventions. Agree as a faculty where the emphasis will be, and then have a very simplified 1/3 or 1/4 of a page rubric. And finally, don't think that you've got to grade all those 240 students. When Lucy Calkins talks about grading, she'd say if there's 35 kids in a class, there better be 36 teachers of writing, meaning we've got to prepare students to assess one another's writing, and a real good way in the next few weeks to do that is practice it. Practice it with anonymous samples of student writing, no student name, no teacher name, so I get experience as a student giving feedback to a colleague. Think about it. Kids do that in physical education, in music all the time, student-to-student feedback. We can do the same with a sufficiently clear rubric. You ask, do I have a good source that distinguishes increasing standardized testing from formative assessment? So 2 authors to read on this. I think you'll see some outstanding work in the book I mentioned earlier by Larry Ainsworth in rigorous curriculum design. He also wrote the book Common Formative Assessment that addresses this issue particularly. I would say James Popham's book on informative assessment is also worth reading, and immodestly I would add my own article you might have seen a couple of months ago called Uninformative Assessment that kind of pilloried things masquerading as formative assessment that really aren't there. That was published in the American School Board Journal. Friends, we are running out of time, and I promised to keep you at 45 minutes, so I'm just going to answer a couple of more with a promise that everybody will get a response to your questions. And of course, we hope that we can talk to you or correspond with you. A couple of final ones. You threw out the 3 C's, communication, creativity. The others are collaboration. So communication, creativity, collaboration, and critical thinking. And I think in many respects they go hand in hand. Do you think that the outcome of implementation for the need for more time to devote to quality instruction may lead to a longer school year? That's a really interesting question. And you know, I live in Massachusetts, and we are doing one of the largest and I think best designed true random studies in that. Some schools randomly assigned to a longer day condition, some to a regular day with different content. And I think we'll have one of the better answers. But rather than wait for the result of our study, here's the question I want to ask you, because sometimes I think we outsmart ourselves on these kind of research questions. And the way that I would answer this is, what's the risk? What's the risk if you spent extra time in school and it turned out that you didn't need it? Kids having more time in school and less time on the streets, less time unsupervised, less time in TV. You know, that's a risk I'm willing to take. And conversely, what's the risk if we don't spend enough time closing this learning gap? That's an enormous risk that can lead to a higher dropout rate and lifetime consequences. So I realize that this is a research question, and I respect the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for addressing that in a thoughtful way. But honestly, as a parent, at the end of the day, I'm not waiting for statistically significant research to say, do we need more time learning? For virtually every student I know, the answer is yes. I want to thank you all for your very kind attention late in the afternoon, and I hope that we'll continue these dialogues in the future. Thanks so much, and look forward to seeing you again.